Women in the Middle Ages occupied a number of different social roles. During the Middle Ages, a period of European history lasting from around the 5th century to the 15th century, women held the positions of wife, mother, peasant, artisan, and nun, as well as some important leadership roles, such as abbess or queen regnant. The very concept of woman changed in a number of ways during the Middle Ages, and several forces influenced women's role during the period. Early Middle Ages. The Roman Catholic Church was a major unifying cultural influence of the Middle Ages, with its selection from Latin learning, preservation of the art of writing, and a centralized administration through its network of bishops. Historically, in the Catholic and other ancient churches, the role of bishop, like the priesthood, was restricted to men. The First Council of Orange also forbade the ordination of deaconesses, a ruling that was repeated by the Council of Epaon and Second Council of Orleans. With the establishment of Christian monasticism, other roles within the Church became available to women. From the 5th century onward, Christian convents provided opportunities for some women to escape the path of marriage and child-rearing, acquire literacy and learning, and play a more active religious role. Abbesses could become important figures in their own right, often ruling over monasteries of both men and women, and holding significant lands and power. Figures such as Hilda of Whitby became influential on a national and even international scale. Spinning was one of a number of traditional women's crafts at this time. Initially performed using the spindle and distaff, the spinning wheel was introduced towards the end of the High Middle Ages. For most of the Middle Ages, until the introduction of beer made with hops, brewing was done largely by women. This was a form of work which could take place at home. In addition, married women were generally expected to assist their husbands in business. Such partnerships were facilitated by the fact that much work occurred in or near the home. However, there are recorded examples from the High Middle Ages of women engaged in a business other than that of their husband. Midwifery was practiced informally, gradually becoming a specialized occupation in the late Middle Ages. Women often died in childbirth, although if they survived the childbearing years, they could live as long as men, even into their 70s. Life expectancy for women rose during the High Middle Ages, due to improved nutrition. As with peasant men, the life of peasant women was difficult. Women at this level of society had considerable gender equality, but this often meant shared poverty. Until nutrition improved, their life expectancy at birth was significantly less than that of male peasants, perhaps 25 years. As a result, in some places there were 4 men for every 3 women. High Middle Ages. Eleanor of Aquitaine was one of the wealthiest and most powerful women in Western Europe during the High Middle Ages. She was the patroness of such literary figures as Wace, Benoit de Saint-Maur, and Chrétien de Troyes. Eleanor succeeded her father as Suadori, Duchess of Aquitaine and Countess of Poitiers at the age of 15, and thus became the most eligible bride in Europe. Hérode of Landsberg, Hildegard of Bingen, and Héloïse d'Argenteuil were influential abbesses and authors during this period. Hadovich of Antwerp was a poet and mystic. Both Hildegard of Bingen and Trotta of Salerno were medical writers in the 12th century. Constance of Sicily, Orica of Leon and Castile, Jonai of Navarre, Melisenda of Jerusalem and other queens regnant exercised political power. Female artisans in some cities were, like their male equivalents, organized in guilds. Regarding the role of women in the Church, Pope Innocent III wrote in 1210, "No matter whether the Most Blessed Virgin Mary stands higher, and is also more illustrious, than all the apostles together, it was still not to her, but to them, that the Lord entrusted the keys to the kingdom of heaven." Late Middle Ages. In the late Middle Ages, women such as Saint Catherine of Siena and Saint Teresa of Avila played significant roles in the development of theological ideas and discussion within the Church, and were later declared doctors of the Roman Catholic Church. The mystic Julian of Norwich was also significant in England. Isabella I of Castile ruled a combined kingdom with her husband Ferdinand II of Aragon, and Joan of Arc successfully led the French army on several occasions during the Hundred Years' War. Christine de Pizan was a noted late medieval writer on women's issues. Her book of the City of Ladies attacked misogyny, while her The Treasure of the City of Ladies articulated an ideal of feminine virtue for women from walks of life ranging from princess to peasant's wife. Her advice to the princess includes a recommendation to use diplomatic skills to prevent war. If any neighboring or foreign prince wishes for any reason to make war against her husband, or if her husband wishes to make war on someone else, the good lady will consider this thing carefully, bearing in mind the great evils and infinite cruelties, destruction, massacres and detriment to the country that result from war. The outcome is often terrible. She will ponder long and hard whether she can do something to prevent this war. From the last century of the Middle Ages onwards, restrictions began to be placed on women's work, and guilds became increasingly male-only. Female property rights also began to be curtailed during this period. Marriage. Medieval marriage was both a private and social matter. According to canon law, the law of the Catholic Church, marriage was a concrete exclusive bond between husband and wife, giving the husband all power and control in the relationship. Husband and wife were partners and were supposed to reflect Adam and Eve. Even though wives had to submit to their husband's authority, wives still had rights in their marriages. McDougall concurs with Charles Reade's argument that both men and women shared rights in regards to sex and marriage, which includes the right to consent to marriage, the right to ask for marital debt or conjugal duty, the right to leave a marriage when they either suspected it was invalid or had grounds to sue for separation, and finally the right to choose one's own place of burial, death being the point at which a spouse's ownership of the other spouse's body ceased. Regionally and across the time span of the Middle Ages, marriage could be formed differently. Marriage could be proclaimed in secret by the mutually consenting couple, or arranged between families as long as the man and woman were not forced and consented freely, but by the 12th century in Western canon law, consent between the couple was imperative. Marriages confirmed in secrecy were seen as problematic in the legal sphere due to spouses redacting and denying that the marriage was solidified and consummated. Peasants, slaves, and maidservants needed the permission and consent of their master in order to marry, and if they did not, they were punished. Marriage also allowed for the couple's social networks to expand. According to Bennett, who investigated the marriage of Henry Croyle Jr. and Agnes Pennefader, and how their social spheres changed after their marriage, due to the couple's fathers, Henry Croyle Sr. and Robert Pennefader, being recorded. Bennett details how Croyle Jr.'s social network expanded greatly as he gained connections through his occupational endeavors. Agnes' connections expanded also based on Croyle Jr.'s new connections. However, Bennett also signifies that a familial alliance between the couple's families of origin did not form. Croyle Jr. had limited contact with his father after his marriage, and his social network expanded from the business he conducted with his brothers and other villagers. Agnes, though all contact with her family did not cease, her social network expanded to her husband's family of origin and his new connections. Widowhood and remarriage. Upon the death of a spouse, widows could gain power in inheriting their husband's property as opposed to adult sons. Male primogeniture stipulated that the male heir was to inherit their deceased father's land, and in cases of no sons, the eldest daughter would inherit property. However, widows could inherit property when they had minor sons, or if provisions were made for them to inherit. Peter Franklin investigated the women tenants of Thornbury during the Black Death due to the higher-than-average proportion of women tenants. Through court rolls, he found that many widows in this area independently held land successfully. He argued that some widows may have remarried due to keeping up with their tenure and financial difficulties of holding their inherited land, or community pressures for the said widow to remarry if she had a male servant living in her home. Remarriage would put the widow back under the thumb and control of her new husband. However, some widows never remarried and held the land until their deaths, which ensured their independence. Even young widows, who would have had an easier time remarrying, remained independent and unmarried. Franklin considers the lives of widows to have been liberating, because women had more autonomous control over their lives and property. They were able to argue their own cases in court, hear labor, and cultivate and manage holdings successfully. Franklin also discusses that some Thornbury widows had second and even third marriages. Remarriage would have affected inheritance of property, especially if the widow had children with her second husband. However, there are several cases where sons from the widow's first marriage would succeed inheritance over the second husband. McDougall also notes, like the varying forms of marriage, the canon law regarding remarriage varied across regions. Both men and women could have been permitted to freely remarry or may have been restricted or deemed to serve penance before remarrying.